Welcome to the Explainer. Okay, let's just dive right into this. When we watch pro tennis, it looks so fluid, right? Pure rhythm and grace. But beneath that surface layer of sweat and bright apparel, it's actually this brutal, highly calculated matrix of physics, biomechanics, and math. Every single movement, from the exact second that ball is tossed to the squeak of a shoe on the court, is dictated by absolutely immutable scientific laws.
Which brings us to a really fascinating question. What actually separates a good tennis player from a true Grand Slam champion? I mean, on TV, it might look like pure, unadulterated instinct. But today, we're peeling back the curtain to reveal the invisible scientific forces that dictate every single point. Because, spoiler alert, it's not just about who hits the ball the hardest or who runs the fastest. It's about who efficiently harnesses physics to their advantage. To truly wrap our heads around these forces, just think about the sheer g-force and kinetic energy it takes to hit a peak serve velocity of over 150 miles per hour. That is literally faster than a skydiving human in freefall. A tennis ball only weighs about 2 ounces, yet to accelerate it to 150 miles per hour, the human body has to become this highly coordinated, explosive machine. If even a tiny fraction of that energy goes to the wrong place, you get a fault, or much worse, a torn ligament.
So, here's the game plan for today. First, we'll be decoding the kinetic chain. Then, we'll get into the physics of footwork. After that, we'll explore dynamic systems and coaching, and we'll wrap it all up with the analytics of winning.
All right, let's kick things off with part 1, decoding the kinetic chain.
We've got to start our journey at the absolute micro level of the athlete's body to figure out how this raw, devastating power is generated sequentially without completely destroying a player's arm. Think of it like a kinetic whip. Basically, the kinetic chain is just an interconnected sequence of body segments and joint movements that transfer energy from the ground up to produce maximum force. So a champion? They aren't serving with their arm. No way. They serve with their entire body. They push against the earth, transfer that energy up through the legs, pull it through the hips and torso, and finally unleash it right through the shoulder, elbow, wrist, and racket. If any single link in that chain is broken or delayed by even a millisecond, the whip completely loses its snap.
Advanced biomechanics show us that this whip relies on 3 explosive steps happening in the blink of an eye. First is preparation. That's storing elastic energy in the knee bend. Second is acceleration. This is that famous rocket drop where the shoulder maximizes its external rotation right before launching forward. And the third step, which is absolutely crucial, deceleration. That huge follow-through isn't just for looking good. It is biomechanically required to safely dissipate all that violent energy so the shoulder joint doesn't literally tear itself apart.
Moving right along to section 2, the physics of footwork.
So, all that raw upper body power we just talked about is entirely dependent on being firmly grounded to the court surface. As the old saying goes, you simply can't fire a cannon from a canoe. And honestly, it's time to bust a long-held myth here. Sliding is absolutely not just for clay courts anymore. Modern players aggressively slide on hard courts too. But the physics of how the shoe interacts with the surface change dramatically. On a clay court, you're dealing with a loose, granular surface. It's got a much lower friction threshold, which lets the shoe glide pretty predictably. But an acrylic hard court? That is a rigid, unforgiving surface with extreme friction demands. The player is quite literally fighting the court.
Now, what's truly mind-blowing is that hard-court sliding relies on a highly specific mathematical ratio of shoe contact. The engineers making these shoes are actually calculating the exact coefficient of friction. Think about it. If there's too much grip, the player's ankle snaps under the immense force of changing direction. But if there's too little grip, they totally wipe out. The shoe has to allow just enough controlled slip to let the player decelerate safely. It acts almost exactly like an anti-lock braking system, but for the human body.
All right, let's zoom out a bit for section 3, dynamic systems in coaching. Stepping back from the treads on the player's shoes to the geometry of the entire court, we can start to see how these physical mechanics are applied tactically during a live rally. Look, the days of just standing in a line and memorizing robotic strokes are long gone. Elite coaches today use what's called dynamic systems theory. This is basically a coaching framework that treats athletes as complex, self-organizing systems constantly adapting to environmental constraints. In plain English, players are taught to adapt in real time. They aren't just hitting a forehand. They are continuously calculating the changing geometry of the court, the incoming spin and speed of the ball, and the exact positioning and momentum of their opponent. It is incredibly high-speed spatial reasoning.
And the whole point here is that this dynamic adaptability allows the player to systematically dismantle specific threats. Let's take the classic aggressive baseliner. The player who just wants to camp out at the back and hit heavy, rhythmic ground strokes. A dynamically trained player knows better than to just try and out-hit them. Instead, they alter the environment entirely. They change the pace with slices. They use extreme physics-defying court angles to yank the baseliner totally out of their comfort zone. They'll drop shot to draw them up to the net, and they attack the exact moment the opponent transitions their weight. Honestly, it's like playing speed chess while sprinting.
Which brings us to our final section, the analytics of winning.
Zooming all the way out to the macro level, we can see how all of these physical and tactical elements are ultimately governed by cold, hard data. At the highest level, every single swing is a calculated risk. Players and their teams now rely heavily on advanced statistical analytics to optimize their shot distribution. The math literally dictates the play. For instance, serving out wide might give you a 45% win probability because it opens up the court. Serving down the tee sits around 40%. Meanwhile, serving right at the body is down at 15%, so it's usually just kept in the back pocket as a surprise tactic. These pros aren't out there guessing. They are running complex statistical models in their heads before they even toss the ball.
And this data reveals something even deeper about human psychology out there on the court. During those life-or-death milliseconds of a match, players drastically alter their risk tolerance. Their game theory strategies completely shift depending on the statistical weight of the point. Like, if it's 15-all in the first game, a non-critical point, a player might go for a low-percentage, high-reward scorcher down the line. But when they're staring down a breakpoint or a deep tiebreak, the analytics show that players almost always revert to their mathematically safest patterns. They maximize their margins over the net and lean completely on their highest probability strokes.
So, when you pull all these different layers together, you really start to see the true matrix of competitive tennis. From the kinetic whip storing elastic energy in a player's shoulder, down to the microscopic friction coefficients of shoe rubber sliding on acrylic, all the way up to the statistical game theory dictating a breakpoint serve. The game is just this beautiful, interconnected scientific system. It's human athleticism perfectly fused with applied physics and mathematics.
Which leaves us with the most important question for you. How are you going to apply this hidden science to your very next match? The next time you step onto the court yourself, or even just sit down on the couch to watch a Grand Slam final, try not to just watch the ball. Look for the kinetic chain. Look for the slide mechanics. Look for those mathematical patterns. Think about the invisible forces at play and ask yourself, how can I leverage this math to win? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I will catch you in the next one.